Is ready. Okay. Definitely, they know that particular program somewhere. I think it's let me just send it to you. think we can. Send to some. Everyone, my name is Rhoda Robinson, and we're glad that you joined us today. This is our CSW event for our event for the United Nations Commission to Implement session 2024. I'd like to thank you all in Lagos, in Oyo for joining us, and our participants online, thank you all so much. And our dear panelists and our speaker who have taken out the time today to be with us here. I'd like to hand over to our host, Brenda Orlana, who is going to give us a bit of introductions and kind of let us know everything about Myriad USA and what we do. And yeah, so please, welcome everyone.
Hello everyone, welcome. I'm Brenda Orellana. Allow me to welcome you on behalf of Myriad USA and our colleague Kari, who is our Africa director, who regrets not being able to be here today. She needed to go to a conference, had to attend it. My name is Brenda again. I am the gift manager here at Myriad USA. I help the experience for donors in helping their donations and support towards our over 1,000 African-American nonprofits and donors, as well as our over 1,000, pardon me, nonprofit organizations from our America's Friends Fund partnership. Myriad USA, for those who don't know or not familiar with Myriad USA, we help facilitate cross-border philanthropic capital to Africa, Europe, Latin America, and beyond by being the bridge for U.S. donors, social enterprises, as well as nonprofits overseas. We also help regional expertise and our global platform to impact local solutions. We recently rebranded, so most of you might know us as the King Badal Foundation United States, or KBF US, and now we're known as Myriad USA. We merged with Give to Asia to help globally. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Derek Clark.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brenda, for that introduction. My name is Paul. I'm co-founder at HACI, and I'll quickly talk about what we do at HACI and why we are here. So HACI is a development organization based out of Lagos, and we work across Africa to improve the health and productivity of women and girls in underserved communities. So every year we like to bring conversations like this to the global level, where for making the communities and at the same time learn from what works across the globe. So today we'll be talking about accelerating the achievements of gender equality and how we can increase financing for preventing and responding to gender-based violence. So one of the things we aim to get out of this session is first off to be able to learn from each other, to learn what works across sectors, across to be able to foster partnerships and collaborations to increase financing for preventing and responding to gender-based violence. At this stage of this event, I'll quickly bring up Rhoda Robinson, who would be moderating. Oh yeah, sorry, apologies for that. We have on the call Dr. Emma Fulu. She's going to do the keynote address. So Dr. Emma is a researcher, feminist, activist, and one of the world's leading experts on violence against women. She is the founder and executive director of the Equality Institute, which is a global feminist agency working to advance gender equality and end violence against women and girls across the world. So I'll bring her up to have, to set the tone for this event and do the keynote address. Thank you, Dr. Emma. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Greetings from Australia, where it's very late, but I'm very happy to be here with you all. Is it okay if I share my screen for my presentation?
Yes.
Let's see if
You should be able to.
Are you seeing that?
Yes.
Great. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about some research we've been doing about how gender-based violence is sort of impacting all areas of our lives in many ways and is fundamental to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, but also then look at where the investment is currently and why we really need to think about greater investment in this space. So what we know globally is that 1 in 3 women and girls experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime. And in fact, tragically, nearly 89,000 women and girls were killed in the year 2022 around the world, and that happens year in and year out. And we know that that costs the economy approximately $1.5 trillion. So fundamentally, we can't achieve the Sustainable Development Goals that I know many of us are working towards unless we end violence against women and girls. And this is obviously very much connected to gender equality and goal number 5 and what CSW is very much focused on. But it actually impacts virtually all of the other goals as well. So first of all, we need to recognize that violence against women is underpinned by gender inequality and those unequal attitudes and norms that promote the acceptance of or justify violence. But if we look at a few other examples of the SDGs, for example, if we looked at education, we know that globally approximately 130 million girls are currently out of school. And girls who face violence are more likely to be out of school. On the other hand, when girls get a better education, they're less likely to have early marriage, they're less likely to experience violence later in life. Then if we look at the goal number 3 around good health and well-being, we know again it's very connected to violence against women. So women who experience violence have higher rates of acquiring HIV because they're less able to negotiate safe sex. They're more likely to have unplanned and complicated pregnancies. They have higher risk of reproductive and mental health issues. So it has a huge impact on global health and well-being. And even if we looked at something that you might think is not particularly related, like climate, the climate crisis, actually, in fact, when you dig a bit deeper, we find that even things like the climate crisis are very interconnected with violence against women and gender inequality. We know that when we have exacerbating weather events, we have more disasters, that actually violence against women increases in the aftermath of such disasters. So we had this huge problem. It affects so many people around the world, and we wanted to understand, are we investing the resources we need globally to be able to address a problem of this scale and magnitude? And unfortunately, what we found, perhaps you won't be surprised, but is that the investment in prevention of gender-based violence is minuscule compared to the scale of the problem. So when we look at overall overseas development assistance, we actually find that less than 0.2% of overall aid goes to GBV prevention work specifically. And so there's no way we're going to be able to tackle a problem of this size unless we fundamentally increase investment. We also found that when we compared to other areas of ODA spending, that GBV prevention again sits very low on the list of priorities for donors. We compared to health investment, education, environmental protection. We see up here, this is the little white dot up here is the investment in GBV prevention. And this is compared to other areas of investment which have much higher rates of investment. But we know that if we could end GBV, that would have all these positive impacts on other areas such as health and education. And so even if we, for example, if donors just earmarked an additional 0.1% of health and education budgets for prevention work, that would fundamentally transform the landscape of this work. And we need to remember that the prevention of GBV has all these other positive flow-on effects, not just ending violence, but improving education rates, reducing health, other health problems as well. Sadly, we also found that in the broader context of spending on GBV, that actually, while there's been an overall increase in official development assistance, the funding for GBV has fallen by 13% between the 2018-19 and 2020-21. And so even though we know that we've had rates of violence go up, for example, during COVID, we know rates of violence going up with the climate crisis, we obviously have humanitarian crisis where violence increases. And unfortunately, the investment in GBV prevention has only gone down. When we looked at it regionally, we found that actually there are regions in Africa, particularly Southern, Central and Western Africa, that have received the largest flows of funding. But the Middle East, North Africa and the Caribbean have received significantly less funding. And in fact, it's estimated that less than 1% of donor government funding went to the Caribbean and 5% to the Middle East, North Africa region. And obviously in the context of the humanitarian crisis that we're seeing in these regions, this is certainly not enough. So where is the funding coming from? And we looked, we didn't look at absolutely everything. We didn't look at humanitarian assistance, but we looked at the broad investments in different areas from both governments, UN agencies, philanthropic funds, research institutions, and feminist funds. And we are really focusing here on prevention. So we can think about response services, legal, health services. Our focus is on prevention efforts that stop violence happening in the first place. So we see greatest investment from bilateral governments, followed by philanthropic foundations, and then a sort of mix across multilateral agencies and feminist funds and research institutions. So from this, what we're arguing is that it's really time to invest more in the prevention of gender-based violence, and it's only by doing that that we're going to see the progress that we need on this issue. In the report, we can share afterwards, there's a lot more detail about the recommendations and what different groups can do, bilateral governments, other funders, etc. But the way that we think about this overall is that there's 3 key things we need to think about. We need to advocate with government departments and accelerate investment. We need to argue and show that achieving gender equality and GBV prevention is essential for achieving sustainable development. And we need that investment then across budgets. So different budget items and different line areas, whether that's in health, education, social protection, climate resilience, we need to start integrating GBV prevention efforts across sectors. We need to focus on addressing the underlying drivers of violence, which is related to gender inequality and other forms of GBV prevention, improves women's economic empowerment and political participation, improves health, physical, mental, and sexual health as well. So we think we can demonstrate and show that really investing in this is going to have such a positive impact to have the most significant impact. So I will stop there, and very happy to answer questions. And I know there are other panel members to speak as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Emefuolu, for that wonderful keynote address. And thank you for bringing forward all of the staggering statistics of gender-based violence and its impact, on women and communities at all levels. And I think that justifies, sessions like this where we need to continue to have discussions, towards strengthening systems and improving financing to respond and prevent gender-based violence. We would have a session for, responses and questions after the panel discussion. But at this stage, I'd like to pass on to Rhoda Robinson, lovely Rhoda Robinson, to moderate the session. The session is aimed at, discussing strategies for mobilizing resources to support GBV prevention and response. So over to you, Rhoda Robinson.
Thank you so much. As I said, my name is Rhoda Robinson. I am the Executive Director for HACI. Thank you again. Thank you, Emma, for joining us. I know it's like midnight in Australia, so we sincerely appreciate you taking the time to be with us here today. And as you said, we really need to push for more investments in gender-based violence prevention and response initiatives and strategies globally. We need to ensure that we have more investments and more focus towards this area as the impact cuts across other aspects of gender equality and women's development. And to kind of have that discussion, I'll be speaking with our wonderful panelists who cut across different areas in government and society. We have our first panelist who is joining us virtually, Dr. Lola Vivo-Daniel. Tita Lola Vivo-Daniel is a public health service practitioner who has been in the space of preventing and responding to gender-based violence in Lagos for over a decade, and we've had the pleasure of working with her on numerous occasions, and I am very glad that she's able to join us today. Thank you so much for joining us, Lola. We also have with us Dr. Olushola Omoniko, who is a development expert who works in the disability inclusion space and has a lot of experience and insight when it comes to the violence and issues that are within that space, which is usually amongst most of the times neglected and looked over because of how disfranchised that population usually is. So we're really glad that Dr. Onika was able to join us today. And we also have with us, sorry, give a minute, Ms. Rhea Ball, who is a Bermudan lawyer and gender advocate, and who has been working tirelessly in the space of gender equality and policy advocacy and policy drafting to ensure that we have more inclusive and gender sensitive policies within our society and able to contribute to the achievement of gender equality. So thank you so much for joining us, those in the room and our panelists online. So I want us to start first with just kicking off from where Dr. Emma had actually stopped and said that right now we have less than 1% of global funding actually going to gender-based violence prevention and response strategies and initiatives. And when we're looking at this and when we're looking at driving investments in this space, I think one of the first questions that comes to mind is what can we actually invest in? Like what works when we're talking about preventing gender-based violence? And I'd like to push that question to Lola, given the experience in working in that space of preventing gender-based violence. So what works when we're talking about preventing gender-based violence?
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. I hope I'm audible enough.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Emma, for laying a very solid foundation for us to build on. So I think if we look at what has worked in Lagos State, I work for the state government and I'm privileged to work in the agency that was set up to address issues of sexual and gender-based violence in Lagos State, Nigeria. And I think what we've seen over the years is when political will is matched with the desire to address an issue, truly there is no gainsaying the kind of progress that we can attain when there is political will. And so with political will, obviously would come about budgetary allocation to address response and prevention of prevention and provision of services for survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. And, you know, why do we need funding for this purpose? We need funding for different reasons. We need funding to empower women and girls who, you know, statistics have shown are at a higher risk of experiencing sexual and gender-based violence. As Dr. Emma alluded to, you know, when women and girls are not empowered, they are more susceptible to being victims or survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. There's also the huge need to build capacity of relevant responder agencies to be able to provide the services that survivors require. So we are still trying to break the culture of silence, right? So we're conducting advocacy, we're encouraging people to speak up and speak out. But in the situation where a person speaks up and speaks out, and they speak to a responder agent who is not skilled, who doesn't understand the issues, who doesn't know the referral pathway that should be activated when a case is reported, then we've sort of compounded issues. And people may even say it would have been better if the person did not break the culture of silence. So budgetary allocation of funding can be deployed to building capacity of relevant responder agencies, including the health sector, doctors, nurses, psychologists, psychiatrists where necessary, lawyers, social workers, everybody that works in this space that provides one service or the other to survivors. Our capacity must be built to be able to adopt and adapt to emerging trends. And of course, there's a need for enhanced support services. And I think this is one of the reasons why survivors remain in abusive relationships for domestic violence, and some of the reasons why survivors of sexual violence do not speak up. Because if they speak up, what next? Who is going to support them? If it's a survivor of domestic violence, for instance, what's going to happen to me after I've reported? There's a high likelihood that the alleged abuser is the breadwinner. And so what happens to the education of the children, if there are children? Where would I stay, even if I'm able to get shelter for 3 months, 6 months max? Then what? right? How can I be empowered? So these are the various considerations that survivors face before they report cases. And so funding can be deployed to ensuring that holistic support services are made available to survivors. When we say holistic, we're talking about the provision of shelters, we're talking about access to free quality medical care, we're talking about access to psychosocial support, we're talking about access to lawyers, because obviously the survivor may need legal representation. We're talking about social services, in case where you need maintenance or you need even to access or have custody of your children. That's where social welfare comes in. So all these critical services are required if we're going to truly provide holistic support to survivors. So just to recap, we're talking about empowering women and girls. That's what the funds can be deployed to. We're looking at building capacity of relevant responder agencies to be able to provide, quality services to survivors and make sure that in the process of them accessing justice, they are not re-traumatized and that their issues are not compounded. And then enhance support services. Ensure that we're able to deploy, activate the whole referral pathway for survivors and make these services accessible, if possible, at no cost to them.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to hop on one thing that you said, and that will lead me to my next question for Olusola. And now you've expanded a lot on the need for financing. Like, it's clear, we need to build the capacity of our responders. We need to ensure that women who are survivors of gender-based violence have somewhere to go and build their skills to be able to get out of that situation and break the chain of secondary violence as well. But so I'll ask Shola now, based on your own experience working with underserved population, especially people living with disability, what have you seen having the challenges for financing this kinds of initiative that are particular for this population?
Thank you so much, Verda. Thank you so much, everyone. I think this is a very important conversation we're having. And I once again work with Project Enable Africa, which is focused on promoting the rights, empowerment, and social inclusion of persons with disabilities. Like you may know, women with disabilities suffer even double. First, on the account of their disabilities, and secondly, on the account of gender. And of course, there's a lot to say in that space, and I'll try as much as possible to touch on it. But bringing the conversation as a whole, I want to sort of establish a framework that what I would then talk about would be viewed through. And in establishing that framework, I want to touch on four things, which are four components, four aspects that gender experts globally have agreed are like major drivers of access of women to finance. I hope you can hear me okay. I'll try to increase the volume of my voice. So I was saying that I want to sort of establish a framework, a conceptual framework that would help us get this conversation in lot more, building on what Lola just said. And the first one is understanding the need for high-quality survivor-centric GBV response systems. Either we're talking finance or health, whatever it is. And that is comprehensive because finance in itself is a tool, right? At the end of the day, what are we trying to achieve with this? It's basically to ensure that for those who might have experienced GBV, there is a survivor-centric support. And for those who do not, their chances of experiencing it is reduced or eliminated totally. And that's one. The second thing I want to say is the need for structural intervention, which is what Lola just spoke about in terms of the legal framework that sort of guides all of this. No matter what we do, especially at the macro level as a country, if there is no comprehensive gender strategy, gender laws, and legal framework, it then becomes what individuals think. We are at the mercy of individuals or corporate structure. But when we have that overarching strategy in terms of structural intervention, then it's no longer a conversation of what we choose to do or not do. It's not a conversation of what we must do. And I think that's another framework I want to establish. Adding to that is the need to on a general terms, the behavioral outcome of reducing the acceptance of GBV. And this is very cultural. Also because in Nigeria, for example, we are dealing with a multicultural setting where, laws, customs differs. And in some cases, especially in communities where women take the front lead and men are sitting at home, women are the breadwinner, the conversation is different. In fact, GBV at that level may take a different tone because in that case, the recipient of such violence might not be women, right? And that's why, broadening the scope of this conversation might be super important. And the fourth one is how do we then engage locally, right? As much as we want to talk about structural things, how do we bring this to local context? So looking at this 4 framework, I'll speak through quickly to 5 areas I think are important, especially for resource financial mobilization. The first one here is how do women have access to resources? Generally, it's said, there's a statistic that says about 2.7 billion people still have access to internet, which is an important resource. Over 1.7 businesses led by women are still underfunded by over 1.7 trillion dollars. How much of access do women have to resources? So we must be talking about access and redefining what access means for women, not what we think it means by dictionary definition. Secondly is talking about financial resources, we should talk about jobs. Access to decent job opportunities is extremely important, right? Over 60% of women's employment globally are in the informal sector that are not generally captured, and are not supported and provided for by the formal, government. Or how do we make sure that women are part of, we can capture the value that women drive, in a lot of ways. We must ensure, still speaking about jobs, that apart from women formalizing their engagement and being taken care of even when they're in the informal sector, how do we do with pay transparency, equal pay for the equal value of work, incorporating maternal health, maternal care, and all of the other time that women might need off work to be sure that they take care of themselves. And of course, that brings me to the third point of time, and that's extremely important because we know that women spend a lot of their time in unpaid cared work that we do not put value on. Data says that at least $10.8 trillion is spent, is lost annually, by women who do work that are not paid for. And that is almost ×3 of the biggest tech industry, the value that they drive. Adding to that quickly is security, and this is extremely important as we talk about the future of work as digital technology improve. We're talking about both physical security and cyber security. How safe are women to deliver the value that they have, in this context and get the pay that they need as much as they should? And finally, it's rights, how much we understand the rights of women. Basically, generally, the primary old, custodian of value in many contexts, especially among in African countries, land. And these are also countries where women are not allowed to own rights. They do not, land, they do not have the right to own it. And even when they pay for it, they have to bring male people in their family to be the owner of it. All of these are the barriers and the issues we have to talk about. And remembering the framework I established earlier, how do we think about the rights of women, particularly women with disabilities who suffer, even more? And the interesting thing is, even among the women with the community of women with disability, there's GBV, violence that they experience, not just from men in general, but also from men with disabilities, who in themselves are disempowered, and are expressing that reality by being violent. So these are some of the issues I thought to bring to the top of the conversation, and I hope we can continue to discuss this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shola. And I think one of the key things that you've been able to bring out is the intersectionalities that women face when it comes to gender-based violence. And I think that will lead me to you, Ria. Based on your work with the foundation that you're a board member on, and your work with working with policy drafting and advising on policy implementation, how do we see the allocation of funding that effectively responds to this intersectionalities, responds to the needs of women, especially at the grassroots, and we're able to actually reach the vulnerable population who are experiencing gender-based violence on a daily basis?
I think it firstly starts with gender responsive budgeting. So if we're looking at national budgets through a gender lens, meaning if we're looking at it to assess and analyze what the budget policies are, what expenditures are when it comes to spending on gender-based violence, we have to ensure that there is space created specifically to allocate funds towards gender-based violence prevention. I think it also includes partnerships, so public and private partnerships. It's one thing to have funding, but then it's a multi-sectoral approach, which was mentioned before. So we not only have to engage governments, we also have to engage the private sector, because this opens up and allows us to leverage additional resources and expertise for gender-based violence initiatives. Companies can contribute through corporate social responsibility programs. These things can look like employee giving programs. So I think overall, it starts with assessing the budget through a gender lens, but then also looking to expand that through partnerships.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think your emphasis on partnership and the role it plays is extremely important, especially when it comes to how the opportunities for that collaboration, not just within the public sector or the private sector, with the communities themselves. And I'll come back to you, Lola. Like, what opportunities for those kinds of collaborations and partnerships, especially among stakeholders, can we have or do we have that can help us strengthen our connections and access to financial services and financial mechanisms for gender-based violence?
Thank you. I think I'm sorry, I didn't get the name of the speaker that just gave up my intervention. So I think she's mentioned some of these initiatives or interventions that we can take advantage of. So public-private partnership, getting the government involved, working closely with a good partnership between the government and civil society organization. I think when it comes to working with the private sector, I think for us here in this part of the world, in Nigeria, Lagos, I don't think it's an area that we have really taken advantage of. And not because of want of trying. I found over the years, I've done this for roughly 12, 13 years now. And so in my little time of doing this work, I found out that private sector this isn't really something that the private sector wants to be associated with, right? You have private sector interested in climate change. You have private sector interested in blindness, autism, which is great. These are great initiatives that we must put the spotlight on. But there are very, very few companies that will be interested in being associated or funding, sexual and gender-based violence issues. And so, but I do believe that it's possible that some corporate organizations are interested, but they don't know who to reach out to, and they don't know how to reach out. And so I think it's for us, practitioners in this space, to help the private sector see what is in it for them, because after all, they are not a charitable organization. They are trying to make profit. So how can we get them to see what is in it for them to support initiatives such as ours? We're talking about sexual and gender-based violence. We're talking about sexual harassment. How do we make them see that if their staff who is experiencing violence is not able to access support, chances are that person will not be able to deliver optimally on the job, right? And then they see how it affects the bottom line, and then they are now able to take decisions to support such causes. So I think the private sector is a major resource that we need, honestly, to tap into. Of course, we can't overemphasize the need for the government, right? I know that there are some jurisdictions where the government plays a back role, And so you have NGOs, CSOs that are providing services, CSOs are doing prevention, and the government is just at the back. I think that's an abnormality. When we're talking about sexual and gender-based violence, we're talking about some of the most heinous crimes. And let's not forget that a crime is committed against the state. So the government has to really put its money where its heart is. If the government says, this is an issue that we are passionate about, there must be budgetary allocation, statutory allocation for preventing and responding to sexual and gender-based violence. It's not enough to say, as a state or as a country, this is who we are. We must see it in the budget of the year. This is the line, and this is the amount of resources that have been voted to preventing and responding to sexual and gender-based violence. I'm a firm believer of collaboration. I think this is, we need to collaborate more. When I say we, I mean even amongst the civil society organizations, because donors come in and sometimes it appears that there's duplication of efforts. This particular NGO is training police personnel, another NGO is training the same police personnel. And imagine if we had pulled resources together, and then collaborated and organized one major event. I want to believe that we would have been able to get more traction. So I think another way of another opportunity that exists is collaboration amongst the CSOs and the NGOs, and also collaboration amongst or between the government and civil society organizations. And I think COVID showed us the great power that lies when people collaborate, when people are on the same page and they're able to pull resources together and address a common goal. It's really important that we really embrace collaboration and still keeping that individualistic essence of who we are as HACI, as DSBA, as another NGO, but we're working towards one common goal, which is perhaps to prevent or embark on programs that are geared at ensuring survivors are able to access holistic support. So I would say private sector, we need to tap into the private sector. CSR, let them see what is the need for them to support initiatives such as this. We need to also do more in terms of collaboration amongst or between CSOs and NGOs, and then between government and CSOs. And then finally, government needs to be at the forefront, because these are issues that concern their citizenry and their residents, and crimes are committed against the state. The government has a duty to ensure that its people or her people are safe.
Thank you so much. I think you've like really expanded on that need for collaboration between the different sectors and the different stakeholders that we have. And I think it's also very important when we are dealing with the stigma that is gender-based violence, especially when it comes to those who want to fund it and those who should be supporting and investing in an end to gender-based violence. That will lead me to my question, Shola. What innovative financing mechanisms do you think, or strategy do you think would be effective in mobilizing these resources to support gender-based violence prevention and response initiatives?
Thank you. So building on what Lola said, which is really about the need to collaborate, I will take it up from there to say that sometimes, we need fund, we need capital, we need money, but there is also an important need to create the opportunity for partners to bring what they have. For some people, it is money, like the private sector in most cases, but sometimes private sector is also able to bring a lot of technical support, a lot of connectivity. One of the things I found out is, especially in the fragile states, many fragile states, it's sometimes only the private sector that is effectively in every corner of the country, right? Because there is a private sector from selling a sachet of water, at every village. That's a representation of the private sector. There's somebody selling razor. And where the government might be underperforming in certain instances, there's a private sector that is there effectively. And in a lot of ways, resources can be mobilized by a razor blades vendor who understands the big picture. And that is why the first point I'm saying here is capacity building for the intended partners. For a long time, we've talked about partnership and collaboration, right? And it is not happening as effective as it should be. And I think there's a lot of partnership. I mean, there's a lot of capacity building we should be talking about when it comes to understanding how partnership works. Understanding that when we say partnership, it's not just about money. Although the ultimate conversation in this case is how do we mobilize resources? But I might be able to mobilize resources by putting together my space in our local community for women to come together to meet, to form a cooperative or to form an association where they can mobilize resources internally. I think one of the biggest mistakes we are also making is that resources must come externally for women's initiative. There are huge resources that women themselves can mobilize within themselves, right? If you look at a lot of cooperatives, and I'm a part of a number of cooperatives, I see how many women are part of it. I see how much women mobilize that they do not formally account for. You know, I see how much women already have. So sometimes part of the conversation we should be having is how do we create an enabling environment to even bring women together, to work together, to collaborate with one another, so that they can amplify their voice and then engage together. If a cooperative, for example, and one of the things we are doing at Project Enable Africa is as we train female entrepreneurs with disabilities, we're also bringing them together in an organized network where they can approach organizations like microfinance to say that you may not be able to give us money individually, but as a collective, we can have access to these resources. Because within us, we'll be able to provide what you want. Within us, we have a social collateral system that can support what you want. Within us, we can be we can ensure that whoever gets these resources or these funds is able to maximize it. And that in itself is powerful. So in a nutshell, I'm saying that as we explore all of these highly innovative, strategy, we must also be adaptive in our thinking to understand that women already have a lot of these resources in raw forms, in undefined forms, sometimes in forms that they themselves do not realize. All we need to do sometimes is create an opportunity for women to come together to see the value they own and to be the driver of the capacity building for agencies and organizations that want to organize and drive them. I know that most of the venture funds that came into Africa in the last couple of years, just about not up to 25% of them went to women-led businesses. And I know that that has led to a lot of women-owned ventures that are rising and building and coming up now. And that is fantastic. But at the end of the day, if that partnership is not fully supported with the right capacity, if government agencies are not positioned with capacity, just like Nola mentioned, right, having the right people there. If the private sector do not see the need, because one of the irony of this is a lot of private sector organizations are also increasingly being led by women, especially taking Nigeria as a case studies. In the last couple of years, women have become top managers of the top 5 banks in Nigeria. We need to also be asking ourselves the question that what is that translating to? Then we would understand that sometimes it's beyond just a man leading or a woman leading. It's also some of the structures that are in place that is limiting our thinking to see the value in our capacity to empower women. And of course, there are a lot of ripple effects. The children benefit from that. The entire family benefits from that. Healthcare facilities, which is mostly women, benefit from that. So we should begin to have conversation around how does this impact the bottom line? Because as far as the private sector is concerned, it's about bottom line. As far as venture capitalism is concerned, it's about bottom line. We need to be able to connect the dots and bring this data back to engage and build capacity effectively.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think you make some really valid points, especially when you're talking about connecting the dots between the stakeholders. And that would lead me to my question to you, Ria, because you are in a position where you're playing 2 different roles. You're within the space as an implementer, and you're within the space representing the government and creating policies as well that can influence gender equality and gender responsive systems within our society. What role do you see these different stakeholders playing in advancing the agenda for increasing financing for gender prevention and response? And how do you think these contributions can be maximized so that we are able to clearly see those linkages and how those linkages can lead to the achievement of gender equality?
I think it first starts with prioritization. So making the prevention of gender-based violence a priority. And that's manifested through a national action plan. So ensuring that that is in the national action plan, that we have a strategy and an intention to address it. We talked about political will earlier. I think that's very important. And once we're able to establish a national action plan, the next step is creating legal frameworks. And of course, this is all from a governmental perspective. So if we can create legal frameworks that not only criminalize gender-based violence, but protect and provide support for survivors, in addition to ensuring that perpetrators are held accountable, that will go a long way. In addition to that, we've been talking about this concept and this idea of financing. So it's important from a governmental perspective to ensure that we allocate sufficient financing to address the issue. And that also ensures that we are looking at prevention and then our responses are adequate to address the issues that are presented with gender-based violence. I think, again, it's important to explore innovative financing. So that could look like earmarked taxes specifically for gender-based violence prevention initiatives. Also, we mentioned before, Shola mentioned before, creating an enabling environment. So if we can facilitate an enabling environment from a multi-stakeholder perspective, it creates more of a cushion so that we're not only addressing it from one perspective, but we're addressing it from each perspective that then leads to greater impact.
Thank you so much. And I think you've really wrapped around different aspects of what needs to be done, especially for each level. And most importantly, creating that legal framework that both protects and support the survivor. Because a lot of times we have laws and policies that focus on the protection, but if we are not able to get to those women and girls in time, what happens then? After that, what happens? Do we have the structure? Do we have the systems? Do we have the support necessary for them to be able to go through that experience and come up better at the end? And do we have the funding for that infrastructure to be created? We're fast spent in time, so I'll just go around our panelists again for their final words. And what can we actually say? And this is a question for all our panelists. So please give your contributions or your ideas and opinions on how we can actually increase financing for gender-based violence and response that contributes to the achievements of gender equality, because we need actionable steps to how we can do this. Now, Lola has spoken about the need for intentional budgeting. Dr. Emma also spoke about the need for partner organizations and agencies, even within the government, to have line items within their budgets that respond to gender-based violence. So how can we do this in actuality? What can we do to increase financing for gender-based violence prevention and response? So I'll start from Lola.
Thank you so much. So I think 3-4 things come to mind. I think the first one is, again, to really take advantage of the private sector, engage on public-private partnerships, because the private sector, again, is a resource that we've not tapped into, and let them see what is the need for them to support initiatives such as this. I would also say that there is a need for partnerships between NGOs and government. And then aside from just partnerships, I think it's important that we embark on community-driven initiatives so that the community is part and parcel of the process. and it will help us in ensuring sustainability of whatever initiative we come up with. The community has a sense of ownership. They identify with, they are part of the process of planning, programming, execution. And so that if it's an NGO that has come up with this initiative and the NGO no longer has funding, then the community takes ownership of the initiative. So I think it's important for us to really engage the community. And again, that's where building capacity of these community leaders comes in, so that they can take ownership, account for make demands on accountability, and ensure that the process is transparent. Then I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record, but I honestly do believe that there's a place for the government. Government must put its money where its heart is, right? And we must have, as my sister talked about, gender budgeting, yes, mainstreaming of GBV issues into the health sector, into the security sector, in education. It must be entrenched in everything that we are doing, right? So that irrespective of who is the governor or the commissioner of the day, there is, it has become part and parcel of the state's infrastructure. It has become part and parcel of the country's ethos to prevent and respond to sexual and gender-based violence. Is it possible? Definitely. Is it doable? I think it is. With political will. I always say this. It's not that we don't have funding. It's just that it's not a priority. And if you have states or you have countries that are not doing this or not addressing sexual and gender-based violence, it's not because the funding isn't there. It's because there's no political will to address it. But I believe that with political will, these issues can be addressed, not just to provide services, but more importantly, to prevent the offense from occurring in the first instance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lola. I'll go to Olusola.
Thank you, Rhoda. I'm going to start by echoing what Lola said about community-led GBV response and support system. I think that is really important. It has to be localized as much as possible so that every stakeholder at that level can be part of that conversation. Taking it forward would be the need for, I think there is need, especially at the micro level, for gender strategy. Many countries do not have, and where there is no implementation of gender strategy. Because again, as much as we need down-top approach, we also need top-down approach if this is going to be effectively addressed. So, and of course, to drive that definitely would be global institutions who are able to work with government to build their capacity to put in place this gender strategy, not just to put in place those strategies, but to implement them and make sure those strategies are cascaded down to the very local level, where the reporting also goes back up. So if we are not putting demand on the need for gender mainstream reporting, then we are going to miss a lot of things. We'll miss data, we'll miss what is working, we'll miss learning opportunity, we'll miss collaborating opportunities. I would even propose that countries should have at least one day every 6 months or so, where they bring all stakeholders across together to share learnings, to see what is working, if we are really serious. Again, re-echoing what Lola said, it's not always a matter of funding. Funding is never sufficient for everything. But where there is priority, there's always funds there. And part of the ways to prioritize this is to make sure there's an effective strategy and there's an opportunity for people to come together to discuss this very issue. And of course, that means that different sectors are accounted for, from the security to the tech, to the private sector, to the public sector, to the CSO, everything is accounted for. And finally, would be that our legal structure, legal framework also has to be strengthened. A lot of laws are outdated already, but of course, if there's no front to push them, nothing will be done. So basically, if we live in a country where the rule of law do not hold, where I cannot, if I feel that I've been unjustly treated, I cannot seek justice and be sure to get it, then that is a systematic way of telling people to keep silent. No matter how much we say that, you don't keep silent, don't, speak out. If speaking out will result in nothing, it becomes a behavioral change over the years that we are not just teaching ourselves, but teaching children, young people that are growing, that speaking out is not rewarded. in a place where if a big private sector organization cheats on the woman or commits any form of violence against any woman, if I cannot take such organizations, such corporations to the court and be guaranteed of fair hearing and know that the money or the value they have will not influence the judgment, then what's the point in all of these conversations? So I think it's a wake-up call for everybody, especially those who are leaders, to champion this cause and, of course, be examples in their own personal lives, because they cannot lead what they are not doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shola. And then finally, Ria.
Thank you, Rhoda. So I'm going to echo what's already been said, and I'll start with prioritization. If we make gender-based violence prevention and intervention a priority, then we're going to see more funding directed towards these initiatives. The other thing that we need to spend some time with is also the perception value that we place on women. So if we can alter perception, then we also, drive the importance of a woman's value, and then also highlight the impact that gender-based violence has on women and girls. I think it will begin to change not only our perceptions, but the way that we address and treat women. I think the next thing is ensuring that we are using or implementing data-driven initiatives. So ensuring that the solutions that we're presenting and bringing to the table are driven by data. And, that comes with utilizing data institutions, utilizing the private sector for data collection, data management and information, because that tracks what works in terms of interventions and what doesn't. And I think the final thing that is really important is going back to stakeholder engagement. So we're not only engaging governments, we're not only engaging policy creators and health services, but we're also engaging at a community level. Because if we're looking at long-term effects and long-term progress and long-term solutions, we also have to engage at the community level, because if the community is invested in the solutions, invested in the initiatives that are going to make some changes on this front, we have to ensure that those who are going to continue on the work are engaged and see the value in the work. So I think prioritizing perception and value of women, data-driven solutions, and stakeholder engagement is really important.
Thank you so much. And as we come to the end of the panel, I would just like to emphasize the key points by our panelists on the importance of community-driven initiatives to take ownership and drive sustainability of those interventions, on the importance of the role of the government and driving political will, not just for preventing gender-based violence, but for funding gender-based violence and ensuring that gender-based violence prevention and response, and ensuring that those initiatives are adequately funded, and on promoting global and local partnerships and building responsive strategy, and also reporting that they can learn from to further increase the effectiveness of our initiative, and of course the importance of data in responding to gender-based violence and driving for more inclusive and deliberate funding mechanisms for preventing and responding to gender-based violence. Once again, thank you so much to our panelists for joining us. Thank you, Lola. Thank you, Ria. Thank you, Shola, for this wonderful conversation. As I hand over to Paul, who's going to coordinate the question and answer session. So please, if you have questions online from our online participants, please raise your hands or put your questions in the Q&A. And from our Lagos Center and our Ibadan Center, please, if you have questions, please let the coordinators know so that we can manage the questions. And of course, some participants here as well. If you have questions, please let our coordinators know. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you so much once again to all of the panelists and to Dr. Emma for being on this call. So as Rhoda's mentioned, if you have any questions, you can put in the Q&A section. And but before we go into that, I have a question for all of the panelists, you know, including Dr. Emma. So some of the emerging themes from the conversation we just had was budgetary allocation, political will. But then I just want to take us a step back where, you know, in cases where the political will is not there, you know, where the government is not willing to do things or prioritize GBV, in that case, there can't be any budgetary allocation. So the question is, are there specific policy advocacy frameworks or recommendation or strategies that you have used in your line of work, you know, to address that, to make government have that political will to, you know, to talk about or spend some monies on GBV? So over to the panel and Emma as well. Who wants to take that first?
First, okay, I think Emma, someone's good, yeah.
Sorry, everyone. It's 2 a.m. here, and I'm just wondering if you don't mind if I respond and then get off and go to bed.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm fading. I think that it's been an incredibly rich conversation, and I really agree with what everyone's already said. And just quickly in response to your question, I think, you know, a lot of the work to prevent gender-based violence has really come from the grassroots and from, you know, feminist activists and women's movements before government then took it on board. So there has always been, I think, a strong advocacy movement to get these issues onto the agenda of governments and internationally. And so there certainly is a long history of that work. And I think lots of incredible resources out there around that sort of political advocacy and what is needed if the government isn't necessarily on board. And it's always, I think, inevitably going to have to be a partnership, like everyone has spoken about, because this issue cuts across all levels of society, and therefore everyone needs to be involved in addressing it. And I think what we're starting to see, I think, is if we think about a lot of the work initially started at the community level, small scale responses, and we've demonstrated success at that level. We've even been able to prove that we can reduce rates of violence, you know, by say 50% in programmatic timeframes. But now what we're looking at is how do we then take that to scale? And like you said, part of it is ensuring that the government is really investing in that infrastructure and embedding it into different sectors. And I guess one thing I would add is I would encourage us to think about the different sectors where there is currently resources available, or there's more people investing, but private sector and otherwise, whether that's technology, climate resilience, infrastructure, communications. And because we need both, we need standalone GBV prevention programs, for example, at the community level, and we also need to integrate GBV interventions into large scale existing programs, be that infrastructure, water and sanitation, climate tech, etc., to be able to get the reach that we're looking for. So I think advocacy, women's rights organizations will always be central to this work, and they keep the work moving, keep holding governments accountable. And so absolutely really important point that you've brought up there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emma, for that response, and thank you for joining us today. It's afternoon, yeah, it's 2 a.m. in Australia. So thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry I can't stay any longer, but really incredible discussion, and obviously so much incredible work happening there. So congratulations.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. Thank you for the insights into the conversation and setting the tone for the meeting. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. Bye. So back to the panelists. Do you want to contribute to that question? How can what are strategies or frameworks that we can use to advocate for policies to get that political will, in your line of work?
So where we have instances where there's a lack of political will, this is where the multi-sectoral approach comes in. So where government isn't doing the work, government isn't prioritizing the work, then this is where the organizations step up and begin to advocate for increased prioritization, in addition to the allocation of resources. So I think it includes discussions around the issues, discussions around the importance of the issues, engaging in policy dialogue. So really encouraging dialogue around the advocacy. And in addition to that, it's dialogue around raising awareness. Organizations can also promote gender responsive budgeting, and then also collaboration with governmental organizations. So I think really where we see that, again, where we see the lack of political will and prioritization, this is where non-governmental organizations then have to step up and advocate for the importance of this particular issue.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ria. Shola?
Yeah, just to add to that is also understanding that ultimately those who are in political positions are first of all individuals whose priorities and personal values translate into whatever they choose to do in several cases. And that falls back on electorates, every one of us, that this is one more reason to participate in electoral processes, because the leaders we choose the laws that guide us at the end of the day. No matter how much you and I do, if we do not go through the political process, we cannot change a law, we cannot change anything. And I can say that most of the work that many CSO does, with one right leader and right policy, many of us will be jobless. And the goal is for us to be jobless because we are trying to right the wrong that has not been done over the years. So in very practical terms, if you're really, really concerned about certain things right, then we need to elect more women into leadership. We need to empower and support more women into leadership. Of course, that is another level of conversation in itself, because of the several barriers and all. But I think at the basis, summarizing all of this is political will, beyond all of the policies. Of course, policies and existing legal structures strengthen political will, but an important part of that is an individual that decides that I have access to this power, to these resources, to this authority, and I'm choosing to use all of these resources that I have and privileges to drive women's rights. If we do not have such people, no matter how much laws we have, nothing would work. And that's why it's important that we participate politically as much as we can.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shola. So political participation and supporting women into positions of power where decisions are made. Thank you so much, Shola. Can you pull up the questions?
Yeah, we have live questions from Lagos as well.
Okay, then.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for putting this together. My question is, inclusion is important in curbing issues related to gender-based violence. So this question is directed to Mr. Shola and Mrs. Lola. Okay, in the case of gender-based violence, perpetrated by a person with disability, are there policies or legal framework in place to prosecute such person? Thank you.
Yeah, I got it. Violence perpetrated against persons with disabilities. Are there policies or processes to take care of that? I just want to that.
Yeah, I need to respond.
Yeah, that's the question.
Is there another question? Thank you so much.
Yes.
So let's take all the questions from Lagos first, and then we'll move to Ibadan.
After the typing.
Yeah, we can check.
They don't have access to it.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Thank you, the panelists, and I want to appreciate having us, to have this platform to learn, because I've gained so much today. And thank you so much, everybody. I have two questions. Number one is that between intervention and prevention, which one should be given higher priority? Because programs to address and or support the prevention, I believe it should go a long way to reduce gender-based violence. That's number one. Then number two is that what are the efforts to bring the religious leaders involved to reduce gender-based violence, apart from the government? Because most people that cause gender-based violence are worshippers in churches and mosques. Thank you.
The first question, though.
I did get that. Sorry, can you repeat the first question? We did get that. Can you be a bit clearer when you speak?
Okay. The first question, am I audible enough?
Yes, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead, please.
Okay. Between intervention and prevention, which one should be given higher priority? Because I want the programs to address and also the
So I think between prevention and response, which should be given more priority when it comes to this.
So I think we got that. So two questions from.
Is there any other question?
We got three questions.
Yes.
That's three, yeah. Religious.
Okay.
It's about GBV violence against persons with disabilities.
Okay. We got protecting and responding. So okay. Please go ahead, Lagos.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the session. While the conversation was going on, there was something about leveraging of private sector for funding and financing of gender-based violence issues. But to my own understanding, I believe that private sector and individuals, they want immediate output to activities that they put their money in. But gender-based violence, intervention, prevention, it's a process. So there might not be an immediate output. So how do we juxtapose these two activities to get funding from private sectors? Thank you very much.
Do we have any more from Lagos before we go to Oyo State?
That'll be all for Lagos.
Thank you. Okay, let's respond to Lagos first.
Okay. Then I'll read out the questions again. The first one is related to existing frameworks to address violence against people living with disability. The second question is related to how strategies to engage religious leaders. If we can have conversations around that. The third one was between prevention and response, which one should be prioritized, which one should go first. And then lastly, private sector financing is short-term, private sector, they want quick return on investment. But then in the case of GBV, it's long-term before you see that sustainable change. So how do we address that? How do we, make that work for us? So those are the questions. So over to the panelists to respond to that. Lola, you want to go first?
Okay, I can go first. Thank you so much for those questions. It shows you were listening. Thank you. I think, yes, the first question, are there policies to respond to persons with disabilities? There are in Lagos State, and even in Nigeria, we have the Persons with Disability Act that provides for support and relevant mechanisms to be deployed to survivors, to persons with disabilities. What I'm not sure of is if it's specifically mentioned that the person with disability who experiences violence is able to access this service or the other. But I know that for us in Lagos, we have the Special People's Law, we have the Domestic and Sexual Violence Agency Law, we have the Protection Against Domestic Violence Law 2015, and then we have the Lagos State Unified Response Protocol document, which addresses persons with disabilities experiencing one form of violence or the other. Last year, we were able to provide services to persons with to 13 people with disabilities as survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. And aside from even having the legal framework, it's important to have the relevant institutions in place to be able to provide or assist survivors, persons with disabilities with support. And so in Lagos, we have an agency devoted to persons with disabilities referred to as LASODA, Lagos State Office of Disability Affairs. And I think that's one of the ways that we are ensuring that persons with disabilities that experience one form of violence or the other are able to access holistic support. So the second question I heard, between prevention and intervention, which one is a priority? So this would be my own personal, my response. It's not backed up by data. I feel that we need to spend more on prevention. The problem is when you're spending more on prevention, it's not measurable, so to speak. If it's response, you can say in 2023, we provided services to 5,333 survivors. But how can you really say, you were able to engage 2,000 or 2 million people by, erecting a billboard or by engaging a market? It's difficult to have real data. But I believe, because I have seen the potency of preventive measures or preventive programs, I've seen how we can change mindsets. I've seen how we can change behaviors based on scientific programming and based on deliberate action from the preventive lens. So if it was me as Lola, I would say we should devote more resources to prevention. Religious leaders, I agree with you. They play a huge role in shaping mindsets, encouraging or discouraging the perpetration of gender-based violence. And I'll just speak to what we're doing in Lagos. At the moment, we're wrapping up a 2-day training for religious counselors that provide premarital counseling for intended couples and postmarital counseling for couples. Because we know of a truth that a good number of survivors have reported to their religious leader before coming to report to government, especially when it comes to domestic violence. So there's a need for us to engage religious clerics, not from a condescending or a critical standpoint. No, these are people of influence. Whether we like it or not, there are still some people that will feel more comfortable going to report to their imam or to their pastor. And so how can we leverage on that structure to ensure that we bring these people, we conscript them as ambassadors, and they are able to, we are able to use their platforms, their pulpits, to be able to spread our zero tolerance message. So it is something, it's not just government that is doing this. I'm aware of a lot of NGOs that are also engaging with the religious institutions, letting them know, why they should, address these issues, not just from what the Bible says or what the Quran says, but really knowing fully well that these issues, domestic violence, can lead to murder. It can lead to death, and they wouldn't want anybody's blood on their hands. And they see it from a partnership lens. We are not criticizing you. We are not vilifying you. We appreciate your role, and we want to work with you. And that's currently working for us in Lagos State. I agree with you about the private sector, and that's why I do believe that it cannot just be a one-off engagement. And I think HACI is a good example. I know that over the years, HACI has worked with Access Bank, I believe, and I see Access Bank's logo on this. It has to be a sustained partnership. Access Bank, or let me not use Access Bank. Company A, what do you want to achieve? You want a situation where in a particular local government over next 2-3 years, you are able to conduct and embark on advocacy, reorientate the mindset. Okay, government CSO, what are you bringing to the table? What do you need? How much resources are required? Let the corporate organization be part and parcel of the program. Then you see that they are a bit more receptive. But again, as I said earlier on, when I was making my intervention, I found that private sector typically is not really interested in sexual and gender-based violence cases. But I don't think that should discourage us. Again, we need to let them know what is the need for them. And when they see that, how it affects their bottom line, then hopefully we'll be able to make some progress in that regard. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lola, for that response and for emphasizing the need to engage in the private sector and making it clear what that social return on investment is to them. And how what they're putting into gender-based violence can be of advantage to their company and to the reputation of, of their institution. Over to Mr. Shola. Or Ria.
Sure. I'll just echo what Dr. Lola has said. Which is more important? Is it prevention or is it reaction to gender-based violence? The simple answer is if you address the root of the issue, the symptoms disappear. So we can easily address the symptoms. We can react. We can, have responses to gender-based violence. But if we really go to the root of the issue and address mindset and the value that we place on women and the perception that we have on women, that's when we really begin to address the issue there so that we see decreased instances of gender-based violence.
Thank you, Ria.
Yeah, so starting from where she ended, about intervention and prevention, as much as we all think prevention is important, and I agree, but if we look at the data, if 1 in 3 out of 4 women already face a form of GBV, then we already have our hands full. And, the Yoruba proverb comes to mind, but I'll try not to say it, in Yoruba. But the point is we are in a state of emergency. And when you're in a state of emergency, you have to address what is present fast as much as possible. However, I think intervention can be done in such a way that it has preventive outcomes. When people advocate for justice for GBV violence perpetrators to be done publicly, that carries preventive opportunities, because if sometimes dealing with this issue privately, and of course there's issue about protecting the privacy of survivors, but for perpetrators, whatever is happening to them has to be public so that we all know and see and learn from. That in itself is preventive. Because if I know that this person is ending up in jail or, this or that, then I can learn as much as possible. It's just unfortunate that we are very reactive people a lot of times. We don't deal with things until they happen. Because preventive can also come in various forms as much as possible. So, but I'll just leave that there because I think enough has been said. I think the summary of my point there is intervention should be done, or correction should be done in such a way that there are preventive outcomes. That's where we can have both together. Speaking about GBV against persons with disabilities, women with disabilities in particular, and I appreciate that Lola mentioned all of these agencies, but I also think that these agencies are not, they don't have both. Take LASODA, for example. LASODA is an organization for persons with disabilities, but do they really have the capacity to address GBV and heading towards a no response? As much as they are there, the Special People's Law is there, the National Disability Act is there, but how much of intersection do we have in terms of disability and gender? It's sometimes run in parallel, and that's where the problem is. It shows a lot of, so there are all these components, but there's also a huge gap. I would say that if you want to take this home, can we also have policies for gender GBV against persons with disabilities? Because that then brings the two together in a very firm and straightforward way, not having GBV separate, gender disability law separate, and each of those laws mention one thing about the other. I don't know if you get the sense in which I'm saying it, but if you do have a law, a policy, or a framework that is specific about that intersection of gender and disability, we'll be able to spend time to address that. But in a lot of ways, I think mainstreaming disability into GBV response system is extremely important. I don't know how much of the GBV response in Lagos is inclusive in approach. If a person with hearing impairment comes to a GBV center in Lagos now, how is that? Do we have sign language interpreters there to address it? And why that is, that being said, Lagos is probably the most progressive in Nigeria. And Lagos is not Nigeria. Nigeria is not Africa, right? There are so many other organizations, communities that we have to be thinking about. So in a nutshell, If we do have a gender strategy, then an important part of that gender strategy is mainstreaming disability into gender and bringing both to intersect so that we can train GBV experts, those who can respond to it. We can train disability experts, but there's also need to train disability GBV experts so that persons with disability themselves are the ones driving that conversation because they understand the language and the context much more than the person without disabilities will be attempting to address GBV issues or discussing with the GBV survivor. If you get what I'm trying to say. So I think that is important. For religious leader, I think that has been discussed. I will not add more to that in the interest of time. For private sector, again, we have to find ways to demonstrate value for money because that is the language, value for money. One of the things we observe in the advocacy for the Nigerian Disability Act is the country, the lawmakers, they not even understand what we're saying until we spoke economic terms, until we told them that person with disability can contribute so to GDP. Until we said that there's productivity in disability, it's not enough to see a person with disability. There will be temporary emotional appeal, but it is temporary. What makes it far-fetched is when we see that this connects to our lives ultimately, that we can have a better common good, commonwealth, if we include everybody. And those are the kind of terms of conversation we should be having with the private sector. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Shola, for your response, and thank you for pointing out key things there. First of all, you emphasized that making existing and future laws and policies inclusive. I think that is really important. And also, you mentioned about programming. So GBV programming, I think I hope I get this right. GBV programming should have preventive outcomes. I think that is really, really key. Well, our time is fast spent. We can take one more question from the questions that have been put in the Q&A section. And then we'll have, for all of the questions we can answer today, we'll have the panel answer that and send the answers to you. But then we can just take one more question before we wrap it up today.
I think we can just take the first one.
So
okay, this one is not a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so how does CSOs respond to GBV? What service is expected from CSOs to survive?
I think Rhoda should answer that.
Yeah, Rhoda, you can take that.
Okay, so basically, there are different responses that prevention and response as role that CSOs can play, from ensuring that there's enough advocacy for policies and policy implementation to driving awareness creation and education within communities for behavioral change, to providing response services in itself in terms of economic empowerment for survivors, safe spaces and safe houses for women at risk and girls at risk, to providing support services in terms of supporting them in getting justice and in leaving the harmful spaces. Those are things that CSOs in partnership with other stakeholders and government can actually play key roles in ensuring that we can put an end to gender-based violence. As Paul had said, we will respond in depth to most of these questions through from the panelists, and that will be shared later on to everybody who has been able to join us for this meeting.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I'll quickly wrap this up.
So we call Onikoko to just give us a 1 minute closing so that because we have, just before you close, just a quick thank you to everyone in Lagos and in Oyo State for being with us throughout. I know you've been there since I think an hour before we started here in New York. So thank you all so much for your contributions, and I look forward to kind of reading about everything that you discussed and deliberated on in the spaces and how that can inform the discussions that we have had here in New York and the larger space of the UNCSW.
All right, thank you again for bringing us together. We're very grateful to the host, AC Health Initiative, our physical host here, Myraid USA, formerly Kimbording Foundation, and to everyone, obviously, who made this conversation rich, especially the panelists. And to sort of wrap this up, I would say that this involves everybody. It's about you. And we shouldn't wait until things start happening to people next to you yourself before you take actions. And part of those actions you can take is empowering yourself, especially if you're a woman, getting the best education, being in networks, understanding the laws, being a self-advocate. I think it starts from there. And for all of us, definitely, to be part of this conversation by ensuring that we do our best to prevent violence against other people, especially women around us. I think the summary here is we have to be involved. We have to participate, either politically at the local level, at every level. Let's all get involved by joining conversations like this and as many opportunities that we have. Once again, thank you everyone for being part of this. We're grateful for this beautiful conversation.
Thank you all. Yeah. Okay, so we'll just give one space to our participants from Oyo. Just so we can round up with that.
Okay, thank you so much for the sessions and sorry, can you hear me very?
Yeah, we can hear you clearly.
All right, thank you so much for the insightful session. I want to ask, you mentioned CSR and also collaboration. So for young people in the gender space, they are also working towards achieving this common goal. How do we break these structural barriers to accessing funds and other opportunities to achieve the common goal? Thank you.
Thank you. So I think I'll let Toby over the answer since we've run out of time over here. But one thing I would say is that link up with organizations who can access these funds so that one, you'll be able to contribute and work with these organizations to implement in your different spaces, because young people are one of the closest to the communities where we work in, and they have easy access to those. So by linking up with larger organizations, you're able to access those funding when you don't have the structural capacity to receive that funding yourself, and also carry out your intervention. I'm sorry, I didn't even ask this participants here if they wanted to contribute.
That's fine. I think it's a very brilliant conversation, and I really hope that we have actual solutions, and it doesn't just end as talk. And I think that's the importance of gatherings like this. So, and talking about driving community-led interventions, like she said, that's a very brilliant one. So it's important that we work together, we keep working together in such a sustainable manner, and let's not just work in silos to make this thing a huge success. So let's work with synergy. I'm open for every form of collaboration. I would also always refer people who are interested in supporting the good work that AC is doing. So I'm very happy to be here and to participate in this. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Okay, thank you all so much. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you for our online participants. Thank you all so much. And as I said, we'll be responding to all the questions and posting them online so that you can have, we can continue this conversation after this event. Do enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you all. Bye. Bye-bye.